that Kathleen, the words of integration you read so beautifully, those words just really got to me this morning, I think, based on what happened yesterday. Boy, the reading that Kathleen read for us, that first reading from Scripture, is one of Paul's letters to the early Christians. And I've shared with you before that many of Paul's letters and epistles were written from inside prison, from behind prison walls. The Apostle Paul, like Jesus and like Martin Luther King Jr., were imprisoned. Why, if these men were such men of love, if all they were doing was spreading love, why would the powers that be put them in prison? Paul, like Jesus, like Martin Luther King, was leading a movement of change and social justice. And that was a threat to people in power. And so these men of love needed to be silenced. In that beautiful letter that Paul wrote, he is trying to empower the early Christians by letting them know that even though he had been silenced, that they had been given a voice and that they had been given gifts, amazing gifts. Kathleen just read them for us. They had been given the gift of teaching, the gift of healing, the gift of public speaking, the gift of wisdom. And he said they had been given the gift of working miracles. Now, most people think Jesus was the only one to work miracles. But Paul just told the early Christians, and he's telling us, you have been given that power as well. Now, today's gospel reading, which I just read for you, of course, is about Jesus' very first miracle. And of course, tomorrow we're celebrating a 20th century miracle worker, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So today's message is going to be about the parallels between the lives, the mission, and the miracles of Jesus and Martin. Now, if you were with us last Sunday, we were talking all about baptism. And we were saying how we no longer view baptism as the washing away of original sin. We view it as the recognition of the light that is within each one of us. Jesus was a man, a human being, just like us. At some point in his life, he made an incredible discovery. He discovered that the power and the presence of God dwelt within him. And after he made that discovery, after he had achieved the manifestation of the Christ light within him, he went on a mission. And his mission was to show others the way to the discovery of this light within themselves. And that's why he said things like, you are the light of the world, and the kingdom of heaven is within you. Now, I know I say this quite often in my homilies. It's probably the thing I say the most, because I believe it is a key teaching of Jesus's. Jesus said, all of the things that I have done, you can do. These things and greater. That's what he said. So, if Jesus performed a miracle, as he did in today's gospel, then you too have the power to perform miracles as well. Now, many Christians think it's heretical to believe that. They say, I can't do what Jesus did. Well, I think it's heretical not to believe it. Because if you don't believe it, then you're calling Jesus a liar. Because Jesus said, all the things I've done, you can do. These things and greater. We, my friends, have the power to work miracles. Now, Jesus' first miracle, which I just read for you, turning water into wine at the wedding feast at Cana, came about when he was 30 years old. Now, in Jesus' day, most people were lucky if they lived to the age of 60. The average life expectancy was 55 years old. So when Jesus performed his first miracle at the age of 30, he was middle-aged. He was middle-aged when he performed his first miracle, and if you notice, it seems like he didn't even want to do it at first, did he? When his mother comes to him all panicked and says, "They don't have any wine," he says, "Woman, what concern of this is ours?" I can almost hear Jesus thinking, really? My first miracle is making wine for a wedding? Something so trivial. Couldn't it be something grander, like ridding the world of disease or bringing about world peace? But Jesus' first miracle is important because it is highly symbolic. It is filled with metaphor and with meaning. As we just heard, Jesus takes those 6 water jugs, and he is able to take the ordinary and transform it into the extraordinary, something to be enjoyed and celebrated. Jesus takes those 6 jugs, and through the power of his belief, through his visioning, through his words, his command, he is able to transform the water into wine. And we know wine throughout Scripture is highly symbolic. At the Last Supper, for example, Jesus said that the wine symbolized blood. And what he meant by that is that is the life force that circulated through his being, that power and presence of God. And when we drink that wine each Sunday in Holy Communion, we are symbolically reminding ourselves that that same power and presence circulates through us too. So Jesus' first miracle is about the human being transformed into the divine. And that's why it happens at a wedding. It's symbolic. It's about the marriage, the union of the physical and the spiritual, of the human with the divine. Jesus was able to wed those 2 things within himself and work miracles. And he said that we could do it too. Now, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was a 20th century miracle worker. He and Jesus had a lot of things in common. He was a visionary. We know he famously had a dream. And Dr. Martin Luther King not only was a social activist, a civil rights leader, as I mentioned at the top of the service, he was a Christian minister. Dr. King was a Baptist minister. But as he grew in his spiritual understanding, Dr. King in his 30s, just like Jesus, kind of broke away from his very conservative Baptist theology of his childhood. And what Dr. King came to realize in his 30s was that Jesus was not the sole exception. He came to see Jesus as the great example. And what Dr. King wrote was this: Jesus realized his true divine calling. He completely opened his life to the influence of the divine spirit within him. But to say that Jesus, whose example of living we are to follow, is the only one, both human and divine, is actually harmful and detrimental. To invest Jesus with such supernatural qualities may make one say, oh, well, he had a better chance for that kind of life than I could possibly have. In other words, we could easily use this as an excuse to avoid doing as he did. Unity with God was not something thrust upon Jesus from above, but it was a definite achievement of his through the process of moral struggle and self-denial. Therefore, the orthodox view of the divinity of Jesus is, in my mind, quite readily denied. The true significance of the divinity of Jesus lies in the fact that his achievement is prophetic and full of promise for every other true son and daughter who is willing to submit their will to the will and spirit of God. Jesus was to be only the prototype of one among many. Do you understand what Dr. King was getting at? He was saying that the divinity of Jesus wasn't something that was thrust upon him from above. It was something he achieved. He achieved it through his way of living and loving. That he wasn't the sole exception, the only one who could manifest the Christ. He was the great example for all of us to do as he did. And I believe that Dr. Martin Luther King was someone in our lifetime who came the closest to following that example and achievement. He, like Jesus, had a dream. For Martin Luther King, he called it the beloved community, building the beloved community. And we know Jesus had the same dream. He wanted to bring about the kingdom of heaven on earth. Same thing. For Martin Luther King, building the beloved community was not some lofty utopian goal for people in the 30th century to achieve. He believed it was achievable and attainable in our lifetime. And as we heard at the top of the service, Dr. King lived in our lifetime. If he was alive today, he'd be 90. He's one of our contemporaries. He believed this beloved community was achievable now. And this is what he said about it. He said, "Our goal is to create a beloved community, for love builds up and unites, and hate tears down and destroys. The aftermath of fight fire with fire method is bitterness and chaos. The aftermath of the love method is the creation of the beloved community. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And it is this love that will bring about miracles." That's what he said. This love will bring about miracles. And so, my friends, we are the modern day miracle workers. We are to use this power of love, this light we have been given, to work miracles. And we've seen miracles in our lifetimes. There are people alive today who were alive when women in this country couldn't vote. There are people alive today who were alive when black people had to drink from separate water fountains and sit at the back of the bus. And how many of us, when marriage equality became the law of the land in 2015, said, "I never thought I would see this in my lifetime"? We have been witness to miracles, but those miracles came about because of the power of love. That love won. It won over hatred. The light won over the darkness. That's what Jesus and Martin were trying to inspire us to do, to go and build the beloved community and to bring about the kingdom of heaven on earth. So I want you to know, as Paul wanted the early Christians to know, these powers aren't given to special people. They're given to each and every one of us. You have that light and that power of love within you. May you shine that light for all the world to see, and may you use that power of love as Jesus transformed water into wine to transform our world of darkness into light, a world of hate into love. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. Namaste.